Dry Hollow was the kind of place that broke you down into dust and blew you away. It sat low and mean between two red stone ridges, where the grass rattled like old bones, and the wind never stopped whispering about things you'd lost. In a place like this, dreams were a sickness. But Hope Whitmore, she was sick with them. At 22, she was the prettiest girl in the valley, with hair like spun wheat, and a smile that could fool you into thinking the sun actually liked it here. To her father, Colonel Whitmore, she was a piece of property, his last best chance to marry into a name that mattered. To every other man in town, she was a prize. But to Owen Redbird, she was just Hope. Owen had worked the Whitmore ranch since he was a boy. He was 25 now, built strong from years of hard labor, with a quiet way about him that could gentle the wildest horse. He was Apache on his father's side, Mexican on his mother's, and to the folks in Dry Hollow, that made him less than nothing. They called him names, looked right through him, but Hope. She looked at him like he was the only thing she could see clearly. They found their moments in the dust and the heat. Behind the old Larkin place in the shade of crooked apple trees, or down by the creek where the water ran slow and tired. Their hands would brush, their voices would drop low, like they were sharing a secret the whole world was trying to steal. "Someday," she'd whisper, her eyes fixed on the flat, endless horizon. "We'll leave this place, just you and me. We'll go somewhere nobody can tell us we don't belong." He'd smile that faint, sad smile of his. "Someday," he'd agree. "But your father's shadow is a long one." It was only a matter of time before that shadow fell. One evening, with the sky bleeding purple and orange, the colonel found them. He'd been near the barn and he heard her laugh, a sound that carried on the wind. He saw Owen standing beside her, too close. The colonel's fury was a physical thing, a crack in the air. He barked an order, sending Hope inside like a dog. Then he turned on Owen, his eyes as hard and dead as river stones. "I let you work here because you're useful," the colonel spat, his voice cold enough to freeze blood. "Don't you ever mistake usefulness for worth. You will not touch my daughter, not now, not ever." Owen stood his ground, his jaw set like iron. "I care for her," he said, his voice level. "I mean her no harm." The colonel laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You think caring is enough? You have no name, no land, you have nothing but the calluses on your hands. You'll drag her down into the dirt with you." The words were meant to sting, and they did. Owen had heard them his whole life, but coming from this man, with Hope's future hanging on them, they were daggers. He wanted to scream, to fight, to tell the old man that his love was worth more than all the land in this valley. But he knew it was useless. You can't reason with a man like the colonel. You can only get out of his way. That very night, another man sat at the Whitmore dinner table, Calvin Granger. His father invested in railroads, and Calvin was slick with the smell of money and sweatless confidence. He praised the colonel's ranch, boasted about his own bright future, and looked at Hope like she was another asset to be acquired. "A woman like you deserves a life of comfort," he said, his voice smooth as snake oil. "I can give you a fine home, a place of standing, not some shack in the dirt." Hope felt sick. Her stomach churned and she excused herself, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She fled to her room, but she could still hear their voices downstairs, low and steady. The sound of two men sealing a deal, the sound of her life being sold. Owen heard about it the next day. The news went through him like a sickness. He couldn't fight a man's money. He couldn't fight a father's pride. All he could see was the colonel's sneering face. "What do you have to give her?" "Nothing." Before the sun even thought about rising, Owen packed the few things he owned. In the dim lantern light of the bunkhouse, he sat at a rough wooden table and wrote a letter. The words didn't come easy, but they were true. He told Hope he loved her more than his own life, but he couldn't stand to be the reason her family turned on her. He wrote that he was riding away to find work, to build a life that would one day make him worthy of her, and he told her that if she couldn't wait, he would understand. He left the letter by the back door of the main house, tucked into a crevice in the wood where he prayed she'd find it. Then he saddled his horse, and without looking back, he rode east, disappearing into a sky still thick with stars. Hope never saw the letter. Her father found it first. The colonel's eyes scanned the page, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't hesitate. He walked to the kitchen hearth, where the embers of the morning fire still glowed, and he fed the letter to the flames, watching as Owen's promises, his love, his entire heart, curled into black ash and vanished. By sunrise, Owen Redbird was gone. Just gone. Hope searched for him all day. She went to the creek, to the orchard, to the barn where they had shared their last laugh. She asked the other ranch hands, but they just shook their heads and looked away. She asked her father. His answer was a wall of stone. The boy had the sense to leave, he said flatly. You'd be wise to forget him. But how could she forget? That night, curled in her bed, Hope pressed a hand to her stomach. It was still flat, but a new, secret life was stirring inside her, a tiny whisper of change. Her heart ached with 1,000 questions. Why did he go? Why didn't he say goodbye? Why would he leave her to face this all alone? The wind rattled the leaves of the cottonwood trees outside her window, a dry, whispering sound. She closed her eyes, and her own whisper was so quiet it was swallowed by the darkness. You promised me someday. But someday was gone, and the man who had promised it was already miles away, riding into a future that had no place for her. Or so she thought. The days after Owen vanished felt like a prison sentence. Every morning, Hope woke up to the same suffocating silence. She listened for the sound of his boots on the gravel, for the low rumble of his voice, but there was only the wind and the dust. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. By the time the leaves started to turn, her secret was getting harder to hide. Her dresses were suddenly too tight, and a sickness churned in her stomach every morning. Her father watched her, his eyes narrowing into slits of cold suspicion. When the first snows of winter blanketed Dry Hollow, the truth was undeniable. It was a cold night, the wind howling outside, when the colonel finally broke the silence at the supper table. His voice cracked across the room like a whip. You carry the bastard's child. Hope's fork fell from her hand, clattering against the plate. Her mother let out a small, strangled gasp, but the colonel wasn't finished. His words were sharp, meant to cut. You'll marry Calvin Granger. He has agreed to overlook your shame. The wedding will be soon. It will save this family's name from ruin. Hope's heart pounded in her chest, but she lifted her chin, the fire of defiance burning in her eyes. I won't marry him. Her father's fist slammed down on the table. The china rattled, and a glass tipped over, spilling water like tears. You will, he hissed, or you will not spend another night under my roof. Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice was steady. Then I'll go. The silence that fell was heavier than a tombstone. Her mother reached across the table, her hand trembling, but the colonel just stood up, turned his back, and walked out of the room. He was done with her. Later that night, her mother crept into her room. She carried a small bundle tied in a cloth. Inside were a few coins, a heavy wool shawl, and a hastily scribbled note. Take this. Go where he can't find you. I will write when I can. Remember, you are not alone, and neither is that child. They clung to each other, 2 women crying silently in the dark, their world broken apart by one man's pride. Before the first hint of dawn, Hope packed a small bag. She slipped out of the house she'd grown up in, a ghost leaving behind a life that was no longer hers. The journey to a town called Willow Pass was a special kind of hell. She rode a rickety stagecoach that bounced and rattled over miles of rock and desert scrub. Every jolt sent a fresh wave of pain through her tired body. The other passengers stared, their eyes lingering on her belly, barely hidden beneath her coat. A young woman, alone, and in her condition. Their judgment was a heavy blanket she couldn't shrug off. Willow Pass wasn't much of a town. It was just a handful of weathered buildings clinging to the edge of a vast, empty prairie. The sign on the Mercantile was crooked. Chickens pecked in the dust of the main street. But it was far from Dry Hollow. It was far from her father's shadow. And for the first time in months, Hope took a deep, steady breath. She found a tiny room for rent in the loft above a laundress's shop. It was small and drafty, with a single narrow bed, but the window looked out over the dusty road, and it was hers. It was safe. She worked for the laundress, scrubbing shirts until her hands were raw and bleeding. Later she found she could earn a steadier wage with her needle. Her stitches were fine and delicate, and soon every respectable house in Willow Pass had one of her embroidered tablecloths or handkerchiefs. The nights were the hardest. She'd sit by the weak light of an oil lamp, her needle flying, her belly growing rounder with each passing week. She'd whisper to the child inside her, telling it stories about a man with eyes like river stones and hands strong enough to gentle a wild horse. She told the baby about a promise of someday. The baby came on a wild April night. Rain hammered the roof of the little loft, and thunder shook the thin walls. Hope was alone, her body racked with a pain so intense she thought she might die from it. The laundress, hearing her cries, sent for an old midwife. Hours later, soaked in sweat, her face streaked with tears, Hope gave one last final scream and felt the sudden, shocking release. The midwife placed a tiny, wailing bundle in her arms. Hope looked down at the crumpled face, the skin flushed and red, the impossibly small fists. And a love so fierce it stole her breath surged through her. She named her daughter Joy. From that day on, Hope's life had a single purpose. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building a world for her daughter. She washed linens at dawn and embroidered late into the night. She stretched every penny. She bartered her fine needlework for firewood and food. She often went hungry herself, but she made sure Joy never did. Joy grew like a wildflower, tough and beautiful. By the time she was 5, she had her father's steady, serious gaze. Her eyes were a deep gray-brown that seemed to see right into your soul. She had a laugh that could make you forget your troubles and a curiosity that knew no bounds. But she also had questions. Questions that tied Hope's stomach in knots. Why don't I have a papa? All the other children do. Hope would take a deep breath, her throat tight. Your papa had to go far away, she'd say softly. But he loved you, Joy. He loved you before he even knew your name. Will he come back? Hope would force a smile, her heart aching. Maybe one day, when the stars show him the way home. For a while, that was enough. But the older Joy got, the more she wondered. Letters from her mother in Dry Hollow arrived every few months, smuggled out of the house. They were short, hurried notes, always with a few coins tucked inside the folded paper. Be strong. I believe in you. Hope saved every one of them, little pieces of a life she'd lost. Years passed. Hope became a respected figure in Willow Pass. No longer the shamed girl from Dry Hollow, but the seamstress with the skilled hands and the quiet dignity. People still whispered, but she paid them no mind. Her world was Joy. Everything was for Joy. But some nights, when the wind howled and rattled the window frame, she let herself remember Owen. His smile, the feel of his hand in hers, the way he said someday, like it was a sacred promise. She wondered if he was even still alive, if he ever thought of her, if he knew that somewhere in a dusty little town he had a daughter with his eyes. She never expected to find out. The world had moved on. Owen was a ghost. She was alone. But deep inside her, a tiny spark of hope refused to die. And hundreds of miles away, a man rode through the desert, a similar spark burning low in his own chest. His name was Owen Redbird, and fate, in its own cruel time, was finally leading him home. 6 years. 6 years can grind a man down to his bones, or it can forge him into something harder than steel. For Owen Redbird, it had done both. Those years were spent under a sun that baked the mercy out of the sky, in winters that bit deep, doing work that would break a lesser man. He'd ridden east from Dry Hollow with nothing but a saddle, a bedroll, and a hole in his chest where his heart used to be. He took any job he could find. Breaking horses that would rather kill you than be ridden. Driving cattle across endless dusty plains. He fought off bandits, slept under the stars, and let every scar, every blister, become another brick in the wall he was building around the memory of hope. But no wall is high enough. By the time he was 31, Owen had done the impossible. He'd carved a piece of the world out for himself. Stone Mesa Ranch. It was a sprawling piece of land south of Santa Fe, with red cliffs that touched the sky and wild mustangs that ran like the wind. Through pure grit and deals sealed on a handshake, he'd built a herd of the finest horses in the territory. He had a crew of men who'd follow him into hell. The ranch house was simple but strong, built from his own hands, with windows that looked out onto the mesa. People said his name with respect now. They still whispered half-breed behind his back, but the poison was gone from the word. Money has a way of doing that. But the success felt hollow. He'd come back from town after selling his stock, and the house would be silent, echoing. No wife to greet him, no child running to the door. And in that crushing silence, the memory of hope was louder than ever. One evening, leaning against a fence post as the sun bled across the sky, he finally admitted the truth to himself. He'd built all of this for her. He had left to prove to her father he was worthy. But 6 years had passed. What good was all this land, all these horses, if she wasn't here to share it? The question burned in his gut. The next morning, he saddled his best mare, and he rode back toward Dry Hollow. The town seemed smaller, sadder. The paint on the mercantile was peeling. The same cracked sign hung outside the saloon. The faces he saw on the street were older, worn down by dust and disappointment. Eyes followed him as he walked down the boardwalk. Some people recognized him, but they turned away, as if looking at him was bad luck. He found the colonel on the porch of the Whitmore Ranch. The old man was still ramrod straight, but his hair was silver now. His eyes, though, were just as hard. "What are you doing here?" the colonel demanded, his voice a low growl. "I came for Hope," Owen said, his own voice steady. The colonel's jaw clenched. "She's gone, left here years ago. Shame this family. I don't know where she went, and I don't care." The words hit Owen like a physical blow. He struggled to keep his voice even. "Gone where?" The old man struggled to his feet, his face flushed with anger. "You lost the right to ask questions the day you walked away from here. Whatever happened to her, it's on you. Now ride on and forget you ever knew her name." Owen's hands curled into fists. He wanted to drag the old man off that porch, but he held it in. Pride was a fool's game. He turned and walked back toward his horse, each step feeling like he was walking through thick mud. "Owen." A soft voice stopped him. He turned. It was Hope's mother, standing just out of the colonel's line of sight. Her face was a road map of worry, but her eyes were kind. She glanced back toward the house, then beckoned him to follow her around the side, out of view. Her hands were trembling as she pressed a folded, worn piece of paper into his hand. Inside it were a few coins. "I can't say much," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. "But she's alive. She made her way to a town called Willow Pass. I send her what I can, letters, a little money. It's all he allows." Owen's heart hammered against his ribs. "She's alive?" The woman nodded, tears streaming down her face now. "Alive, and raising a little girl, all on her own. She's so strong, Owen, stronger than any of us, but she's alone. If you want to find her, follow the freight line north. That's where my letters go. He wanted to ask 100 questions. What was the little girl's name? Did she look like him? Did Hope ever speak of him? But the sound of heavy boots on the porch cut him short. The colonel's shadow was falling near the corner of the house. Go! Hope's mother urged in a frantic whisper. Go now, before he sees. Owen shoved the paper and coins into his pocket, swung himself onto his mare, and rode. He didn't look back. The colonel's hate was a weight on his shoulders, but beneath it, a tiny flame flickered to life. That night, under a black sky littered with stars, he unfolded the paper. It was one of the letters from Hope's mother. Simple, loving words. Be strong. Keep going. I pray for you and the child every day. The child. His eyes stung. Hope was alive, and she had a child. His child. 6 years of silence, of emptiness, and now this. He lay back on his saddle, staring up at the same stars Hope might be looking at, 100 miles away. Did she hate him? Or did she, like him, still hold on to a whisper of someday? He had to know. The next morning, as the sun set the horizon on fire, he pointed his horse north. Toward Willow Pass. He had built a ranch with his hands, but now he was riding to reclaim his heart, and the closer he got, the more he felt like he was finally, after all these years, riding home. Willow Pass was little more than a smudge of civilization at the end of a long, dusty road. It was a quiet place where people kept to themselves. Owen rode in on a hot afternoon, his throat raw, his horse slick with sweat. He'd been pushing hard for days, the letter from Hope's mother burning a hole in his pocket. He didn't know what he would find. A warm welcome? A door slammed in his face? He didn't care. He just had to see her. He tied his horse outside the general store and walked the town's single boardwalk. The air smelled of hot dust and baking bread. The scent drew him to a small bakery on the corner. The windows were steamy, and when he pushed the door open, a little bell chimed. Inside, sitting on a bench by the window, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 5 or 6, with chestnut hair tied back with a faded blue ribbon. She was munching on a bread roll, her little leg swinging back and forth, and when she looked up at him, Owen's heart stopped. Her eyes, they were wide and curious, a deep gray-brown, like polished stones from the bottom of a river. He knew those eyes. He'd seen them in his dreams for 6 long years. The girl tilted her head. Mister, you buying bread? Owen had to clear his throat before he could speak. I reckon I might. She patted the bench beside her. Mama says the bread's best when it's fresh. I wait here for her sometimes. The baker gives me a roll if I'm quiet. Owen found himself smiling, a real smile, for the first time in years. He sat down across from her. Well, you must be pretty special to get free bread. She shrugged, scattering crumbs. I help sweep. That's what makes me special. There was a simple honesty in her voice that hit him hard. What's your name, kid? Joy, she said, her mouth full. Owen felt a lump form in his throat. Joy. Of course. It was the perfect name. That's a fine name, he managed to say. She studied him with the unblinking intensity of a child. Then she asked, Do you have any children, mister? The question knocked the wind out of him. No, he said, the word feeling like a lie. Not that I know of. Joy frowned. That's funny. Most men do. All my friends have papas. I don't. She said it so matter-of-factly, but her eyes dropped to the half-eaten roll in her hands. Owen's chest ached. No papa at all? She shook her head. Mama says he went away. Up there. She pointed a chubby finger toward the ceiling, toward the sky. I think maybe he just got lost. Sometimes when I look at the stars, I think he's trying to find his way back. Owen swallowed hard against the raw emotion clawing at his throat. He wanted to tell her she was right, that her papa was lost, so lost. But he was trying. He was trying so hard. Instead, he just said, "That's a big thought for a little girl." She grinned. "Mama says I think too much." The bell on the door chimed again. Owen looked up, and his world shattered. Standing in the doorway, haloed by the afternoon sun, was Hope. She was older, yes. There were lines of worry around her eyes, and her shoulders carried a weight he'd never seen before. But it was her. Unmistakable. Her eyes went straight to Joy, a soft, loving look on her face. Then her gaze slid to the man sitting across from her daughter. Time stopped. The air grew thick. Her face went blank, a cold, hard mask that was worse than any anger. Owen slowly got to his feet, his hat clutched in his hands. "Hope," he breathed. The name was a ghost on his lips, a prayer cracked by 6 years of silence. She didn't answer him. She walked quickly to Joy, took the girl's hand, her knuckles white. "Come on, Joy. We're leaving." Joy looked from her mother's stony face to Owen's pleading one. "But Mama, this is Owen. He was keeping me company." Hope's jaw was a tight, hard line. "Thank you for your time, sir," she said, her voice dripping with ice. "But we don't need company." The words were a knife in his gut. He took a step forward. "Hope, wait. Please." But she was already turning, pulling Joy toward the door. The bell jingled mockingly as they stepped out into the street. Owen stood there, frozen, his heart hammering against his ribs. The baker was staring at him, but he didn't see. All he knew was that he had found her, and he had just lost her all over again. He burst out of the bakery, the sun blinding him for a second. Down the street, Hope was walking fast, practically dragging Joy along. Owen's boots pounded on the boardwalk as he went after them. He had crossed a desert to find her. He wasn't going to let her disappear now. Not again. That evening, the sky opened up. Rain came down in hard silver sheets, turning the dusty streets of Willow Pass to mud. Thunder rolled through the hills. Inside her little house on the edge of town, Hope sat by the window, staring out at the storm. She hadn't said a word since she'd pulled Joy out of that bakery. A firm knock echoed through the small room. Hope froze. The knock came again, louder this time. Then, the door creaked open. Owen stood there, dripping wet, his hat in his hands. He looked bigger than she remembered, his shoulders broader, the lines around his eyes deeper. He was a stranger, and yet, he was the most familiar sight in the world. "Hope," he said, his voice a low plea. She stood up, her own voice sharp, trying to hide the tremble. "You have no right to be here. I had to see you." His eyes flickered to Joy, who was watching them from a corner, her small face filled with confusion. Hope moved to stand in front of her daughter, a shield. "Say what you have to say, then get out." Owen took a step into the room. "I never meant to leave you like that, Hope. I left a letter." She let out a short, bitter laugh. "A letter? You vanish for 6 years, and you think a letter makes it right?" "Your father," he pressed, his voice rough with emotion. "He told me I'd never be enough for you. I had to go. I had to prove him wrong." "You thought?" she interrupted, her voice shaking with 6 years of stored-up rage. "Did you ever once stop to think what I wanted? Did you think I cared about his approval? You left me, Owen. You left me without a word. Nothing." He burned the letter, Hope. The words hung in the air between them. Her breath hitched. "What?" "I left it for you. Before I rode out. I told you everything. I told you I loved you, that I was going to build a life for us. I told you I'd understand if you didn't wait." His voice finally broke, the wall he'd built for 6 years crumbling into dust. "I never stopped loving you." She turned away from him, gripping the back of a chair, her knuckles white. Tears she had refused to cry for years were burning her eyes. "All this time," she whispered, her voice raw with pain. "All this time I thought you just threw me away. Do you have any idea what that was like? To be cast out by my own father, shamed, alone, And carrying your child?" The last two words fell into the silence like stones. Owen went rigid. His gaze shot from Hope to the little girl cowering in the corner. Joy, his daughter. The room tilted. He couldn't breathe. His eyes locked on Joy, seeing her for the first time. Really seeing her. The chestnut hair, the steady gray-brown eyes. His eyes. Joy had been listening, understanding far more than they realized. She slowly stepped out from behind her mother, her bare feet silent on the wood floor. She walked right up to Owen, her small body trembling. She looked up into his face, her eyes wide with a question that had haunted her entire life. "You?" she whispered. "You're my papa?" The word shattered him. Owen fell to his knees, the strength gone from his legs. He reached out a shaking hand, then pulled it back, afraid to touch her, afraid this was all some cruel dream. "I didn't know," he choked out, the words ripped from his soul. "God, I didn't know." Joy's rag doll fell from her hands. She took another step closer, and then her tiny hand reached up and touched his wet cheek. That was all it took. A dam inside Owen broke. He pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest, his own tears mixing with the rain on his face. "My Joy," he sobbed. "My little girl." Across the room, Hope watched, her own tears falling now, hot and silent. The anger, the bitterness, the years of lonely pride, all of it was washing away, leaving only a raw, aching love. The storm raged outside, but inside the little house, a different kind of storm was breaking. Owen held his daughter like he was drowning, and she was the only thing keeping him afloat. And Joy clung to him, her small arms wrapped tightly around his neck. "I knew you'd come back," she whispered into his ear. "I told Mama you were just lost." Owen looked up at Hope, his face a mess of grief and wonder, and a love so powerful it was painful to see. "I came back for you, Hope. After I built the ranch, I came back to Dry Hollow. Your father, he told me you were gone. He said you'd shamed the family and run off. He made me think—" "He lied," she whispered. "He lies about everything. You were the only life I ever wanted, Owen. But when you were gone, and he threw me out, Joy was all I had left. I told her stories about you every night. I told her her papa was out there, somewhere, looking at the same stars." Owen buried his face in his daughter's hair. "And I was blind," he groaned. "All that time I was blind." Joy squirmed in his arms, looking from his face to her mother's. "So now we can be a family?" she asked, her child's voice cutting through all the pain and confusion. "Like the other families?" The question hung in the air. Hope looked at Owen, and for the first time she let him see all the way into her heart. "I hated you for leaving," she said, her voice trembling. "But I never, not for one single day, stopped loving you." Owen got to his feet, still holding Joy. His eyes never left Hope's. "Then let me make it right," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Let me give you both the life I should have given you from the start." Hope covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. She wanted to believe him, but the scars were so deep. "Words aren't enough," she whispered. "Not this time." He nodded, his grip on his daughter tightening. "Then I'll show you. Every day for the rest of my life, if you'll let me." The thunder outside faded to a low rumble. The rain softened to a gentle hum. A fragile, hopeful silence filled the small room. Hope wiped the tears from her cheeks. She looked at the man she had never stopped loving, holding the child that was a part of them both. "Maybe," she whispered, the word barely audible. "Just maybe, some day has finally come." In the days that followed, a fragile peace settled over the little house. Owen stayed in Willow Pass, finding odd jobs, mending fences, chopping wood. But every evening, he came back. He and Joy were inseparable. He'd spend hours just watching her, a look of awe on his face, as if he couldn't believe she was real. Hope watched them, the hard knot of bitterness in her chest slowly starting to unravel. One night, as they were eating stew, Joy looked from Owen to Hope and back again. "When are we going to be a real family?" she asked bluntly. "When are you going to marry Mama?" Hope nearly choked. Owen put his spoon down, his gaze meeting hers across the table. "Soon, Joy," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Very soon." Hope's face flushed, but she didn't argue. A week later, Owen told her he was riding back to Dry Hollow. "We have to face him, Hope. Not for his blessing. For us. For Joy. No more shadows." She was terrified, but as she looked at him, so steady, so sure, she knew he was right. "Together," she said. The ride back was different this time. Joy chattered away, pointing out flowers and cloud shapes, nestled safely between her parents. When the Whitmore ranch came into view, Hope's stomach clenched. The Colonel was on the porch, waiting, as if he'd known they were coming. Her mother stood beside him, her hands twisted in her apron. Hope dismounted and lifted Joy to the ground. The little girl looked at the stern old man on the porch, and with a courage that stunned them all, she walked right up the steps. "Hello," she said, her voice clear as a bell. "Mama says you're my grandpa." The Colonel's face was stone. His eyes flickered from the child, to his daughter, to the man standing beside her. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. Then, without a word, the Colonel turned and went back inside, letting the screen door slam shut behind him. Hope's heart sank, but her mother rushed down the steps and swept Joy into her arms, sobbing, "My beautiful girl, I prayed for this day." That night, at a supper table heavy with unspoken words, something shifted. Joy, unafraid of the silent, angry man at the head of the table, chattered on about her life in Willow Pass, about her new papa and the big ranch he had with all the horses. And for the first time in his life, Colonel Whitmore looked defeated. Later, he walked into the parlor and came back with a small, tarnished silver hairpin. He held it out to Hope. "This was your grandmother's," he said, his voice gruff. "I was wrong, about everything." He looked at Owen, his eyes clear for the first time in years. "You take care of her. You take care of that child." It wasn't an apology, but it was enough. A month later, they stood in a meadow at Stone Mesa Ranch, under a wide blue sky. The cottonwood trees whispered in the breeze. Friends from Willow Pass and ranch hands from all over the territory had gathered. Hope wore a simple ivory dress she had sewn herself. Owen stood beside her, his calloused hand holding hers. The preacher's words were a low hum in the background. All Owen could see was Hope's face, her eyes shining. When it was his turn to speak, his voice was strong. "I left you once because I thought I wasn't enough. I will spend the rest of my life proving I am. I will never walk away again." Hope's own voice was thick with tears. "I lived through shame and hunger and fear, and the only thing that kept me alive was the thought of you. I forgive the past. I choose you. Now and always." Just as the Reverend was about to pronounce them man and wife, Joy darted forward, holding the wedding band. "You forgot this part," she squeaked, and everyone laughed. Owen knelt, and his daughter placed the ring in his hand. He slid it onto Hope's finger, and then he pulled her into a kiss that washed away 6 years of pain. That evening, the three of them rode out onto the mesa as the sun set the cliffs on fire. Joy sat between them, her laughter echoing in the quiet air. Hope leaned her head against Owen's shoulder, the silver hairpin glinting in the last light of day. For years, they had both lived in the shadow of a broken promise. But now, here together, there was no more waiting. Someday was finally here. If you enjoyed this story and made it all the way to the end, it would mean the world to me if you'd hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for listening.